Good morning, everyone. Welcome to All Souls Unitarian Church. My name is Greg Sanders, and I am the music director here. We were just listening to a little music from the movie The Godfather this morning. I thought that would seem like good Sunday morning music for us today. We are really happy that you're here. A couple of things I just want to make sure you know. Number one, there is a congregational meeting immediately following today's service, and it'll be on this same Zoom call. So in lieu of our typical coffee hour time, we'll be segueing directly into our congregational meeting. So we hope you can all stick around for that and know that'll happen immediately following this morning's service. Also, we'll talk about this a lot today, I'm sure, but don't forget that next week we're having an in-person service outdoors at the church. So we look forward to seeing you there. And all those details will be explained to you in a number of ways, but I just want to let you know how excited we all are to welcome you back to the facility. For today's Zoom service, now you can still watch those services on Zoom in the next couple of weeks. So if you don't want to come in person, we'll still have them broadcast to Zoom. So it'll be sort of a multimedia approach to the services. All right, so if you are a visitor or not quite sure how to use this platform by now, I'm not sure what you've been doing for 13 months if you can't do it by now, but if you need a little bit of help, you're welcome to ask me in the chat and I'll help you out. We invite you to observe through speaker view, engage in the chat with your fellow congregants and visitors, and enjoy today's service. Our worship associate is Graham Cannon, and our presiding minister, Joel Miller, has some opening words for us. Enjoy the service. Thank you for joining us today.
Good morning. I'm Joel Miller. Come with an open heart. We will open our eyes and ears to you. Open your eyes and ears to us, and we will open our hearts to you. This is a place where we tell of our lives. This is a place where we share our dreams. We dream of a world where all have a true home, all of us. We listen to that dream. We practice the kind of living that makes the dream real. And we welcome all who are weary of those desolate paths that don't include us all. Those desolate paths that can only tell one story. We share one story here because we're a community, but we bring countless stories of our own and stories of other communities as well. And perhaps a greater story, a story of stories that unites all people and all communities. We listen to stories, we listen to the music of each other's lives so that we learn to welcome the many and the all and celebrate that great story. Truly the story told by this very gathering this morning. Welcome, glad you're here.
Good morning and welcome to Virtual All Souls. My name is Graham Cannon and I'm your worship associate today. All Souls is an all-inclusive, all-welcoming community. We nurture both spiritual and mental growth and encourage the active search for meaning. We welcome you here to be your full self, your whole identity, including your ethnic heritage, sexual orientation, or gender identity. We make a home for people of varying faith beliefs, and for those who are free thinkers. We will act in ways that help move the arc of the universe towards justice. We listen to the opinions of all others. We are united by our covenant and by our belief that diversity is richer than uniformity. We try our best to be there for all who need us. Today, we invite those who are visiting or haven't been here in a while to fill out connection cards. There will be a time for this later in the service. First-time visitors, if you fill out your online connection card, you will receive a small gift of appreciation. We invite you to share thoughts, feelings, and questions, along with contact information and interests. Today, after the service, there will be a small congregational meeting, and this meeting will be about electing candidates for the Ministerial Search Committee. It would be wonderful if you could attend, and I hope to see you all there. Now please join us in reciting our covenant as Elias Kahn Clark lights our chalice.
Let's recite the covenant together. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. This is our covenant.
Morning has come, arise and greet the day. Dance with joy and sing a song of gladness. The light of hope here shines upon each face. May it bring faith to guide our journey home. A new day dawns, once more the gift is given. Yonder fills this moment shared together. The light of peace here shines upon each face. May it bring faith to guide our journey home. Open our eyes to see that life abounds. Open hearts to welcome it among us. The light of love here shines upon each face. May it bring faith to guide our journey home.
Today, you will hear from Reverend Joel about the Aboriginal people of Australia. There is no specific Aboriginal culture, but each tribe does have its similarities. One of the things they share are songlines. A songline, also called a dreaming track, is one of the paths across the land, or sometimes the sky, within the animist belief system of the First Nations people of Australia, which mark the route followed by localized people. During the dreaming, they are a vital part of Aboriginal culture, connecting people to the land. I would say those differences, but similarities, are akin to different UU churches. I know some of you have always been at home here at This All Souls, but I've been to multiple. Every church, though their culture is different, has the same base. That base is our 7 principles. You should all know the 7, or the widely accepted 8th principle by now. But for those who are new or haven't studied them in a while, those principles are the inherent worth and dignity for every person, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, acceptance of one another, and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, the 7th principle, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part, and the proposed 8th principle, journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. These connect every UU, even when we aren't quite the same. The covenant on the wall, I've heard it said 3 different ways. Not just 3 different covenants, but 3 different phrasings of the same covenant. I've also gone to churches with covenants that are completely different. There are many churches whose covenant takes a different path. Those principles don't change. Those principles are what we all share. They define being UU. In some ways, they resemble an Aboriginal songline. They guide us. The 7th principle, respect for interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part, that guides us every day. All of our principles guide us every day. I don't want to oversimplify this. This is not exactly what a songline is. All of these cultures are extremely complex and extremely fascinating. There is so much more to them than just songlines, and even then, songlines are a little more complex than just our 7 principles. But pieces of their culture and of their songlines can possibly give us insights deeper into our UU culture. The Aboriginal people have stayed where they are and adapted to it for so much time that they truly know their land. They've learned to love it and learn from it. A lot of us lack that connection because our ancestors are not from these lands. In fact, some of our ancestors harmed the First Nation of these lands. But as UUs, we can learn and love, and we can respect the interdependent web of all existence. We can learn from the Aboriginal people and try to look deeper into our own culture and beliefs. We are UUs. We believe in all existing beings. Thank you.
Good morning, All Souls. I'm so pleased to be able to do the time for all ages this morning. Sarah Cannon usually does an amazing job, and so I have some big shoes to fill. So this morning I'd like to talk to you about lines, song lines, but also other kinds of lines. So I am an art teacher and artist, and so that's the way that I interpret this idea of Aboriginal song lines. So as you can see on the screen, we have different kinds of lines, and this is one of the first things that you might learn in an art class, or if you become an artist or art teacher someday, this is one of the first things that you think about. So there's straight lines, zigzag lines, wavy lines, dotted and curly lines, and a million other different kinds of lines. So on our next slide, we have an example of how we can use lines to affect our viewer or our audience's emotions. So this image has a bunch of lines that are kind of crazy, kind of wavy, kind of all over the place. And these lines are meant to make us feel kind of frantic or energized. On the next slide, we have some lines that are much softer, much less frenetic, much less excited. And these lines are meant to help us feel calm, meant to help us feel centered. On our next slide, we have an example of not lines, but dots. These dots are a form of art called pointillism. So pointillism is an art form that uses lots of little dots to fill in an image so that your mind thinks of it as one color, even though you have lots of little dots of blue to make the sky and lots of little dots to make the green of a bush. And this is someone's drawing of a famous pointillism piece by Georges Seurat, who's a French painter. The Aboriginals on the next slide also use pointillism in their traditional art. So this is by an artist named Nayura, and she is painting many of the traditional animals that the Aboriginal people held sacred. And as you can see, their use of dots and lines is very specific. On our next slide, I have a question for you. What do you think this piece of art looks like? Any takers? Well, to me, it looks like a map. I see, a cell with organelles, biology. Yeah, I love all of these answers. An amoeba, a reef. One thing all of you have in common is that you're saying answers that are about life. None of you are saying robots or computers or things with hard edges. And so all of you are mentioning organic living things. To me, this looks like a map. And I'm not really sure what the artist intended to create, but art is always up to the interpreter. On our next slide, I have an image from the Museum of Art and Natural History in Australia, pulled from an exhibit talking about what song lines are to the Aboriginal people. So we've talked about lines and their role in how we view art, how we view images. But song lines for the Aboriginal people of Australia are not just lines on a piece of art, but they were paths that they believe were followed by a creator spirit or an ancestor. So some people might call a creator spirit Great Spirit, Spirit of Life, God. There's many names for this idea that we have, or an ancestor. So they believed that our creative spirit or an ancestor followed the paths across the earth, sometimes called dream lines, sometimes called song lines. So the stories and songs that the Aboriginal people told were navigational lines, sort of how we have a compass that tells us north, west, south, east. They used song lines or dream lines because they realized that songs and stories told in the right order in a specific way were a way to learn to navigate a landscape and not get lost in the bush. This idea of navigation or a compass is something that we use as you use, and it is also similar to what Christians believe in terms of the 10 Commandments. Now, that might sound strange. The 10 Commandments or the Quran or the Bhagavad Gita, none of these are song lines specifically, and they're not art lines the way that I showed you in the first couple slides, but they are a way for us to find our way in the world. So when we say words over and over again, the way the Aboriginals used to sing the song lines of their ancestors, we say words to remind us of a way of living that we find important, a way of navigating our world, the way the Aboriginal people valued navigating in the bush. Our next slide has an example of the way that we use our song lines. There's an example of a path, but the next slide has an example of the way that we use song lines. Our covenant. So we said our covenant at the beginning of the service, and Elias lit our chalice. Our covenant is our understanding of song lines. It's not the Aboriginal understanding of song lines, but it's a very similar way of using words over and over again to find our way in the world, to draw on the wisdom of people who came before us to make our way forward. So when we say our covenant every week, it's our way of drawing lines to the past and drawing lines to reach to the future, to remind ourselves that this is the way that we would like to live.
Blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace I have already come. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. The Lord has brought His good to me. His
Good morning again. Today in Joys and Sorrows, I have a very specific sorrow that I'd like to bring to your attention. Nancy Bainey just texted me to make sure that I could share it with the congregation. She wanted to lift up her husband, Gary, in our Joys and Sorrows. He has 2 compression fractures in his back, and he's scheduled for a procedure on June 24th to stabilize it. So please do keep Gary in your thoughts and prayers this morning. Additionally, many of you already have seen this announcement, but Charlie Baldwin has passed away. And he is a beloved and loved member of our community. I remember him most clearly from Adult Forum. Contact information for his son is available in the order of service and in the know if you'd like to send his son a note of condolence. And as far as Charlie's involvement in our community, one way that would really honor his legacy here at All Souls is to keep Adult Forum going. So if any of you are interested in helping with Adult Forum, which was Charlie's love here at All Souls, please do contact me. I'm looking for people to help keep Charlie's legacy going. Thank you.
Spirit of life, God of love, we are entwined in your mutuality. We carry with us today the love for and the connection to Charlie Baldwin, to Gary Bainey, to others here in our community who we love. Maybe we're just meeting and learning to love. We need one another in all of these connections to be fully who we are. May we be wrapped like the strong vine of a delicate sweet pea in the tangle of our daily lives. May we feel each other's pulse and the sense of what it is to be alive. Here in our knotted, twisted, complicated, intertwining lives. May the fragrance of life blossoming pull us from what separates us and remind us of the beauty that surrounds us. Spirit of life, help us remember to pay attention to one another, to this beautiful world, to the beautiful, interwoven, interconnected web strands of life. All that flows through us. May we embrace it, love it without reserve. That beauty always grows greater. And that we find in the liberation of others, our own freedom. For all these connections, we give thanks and say, Amen. So be it. Blessed be.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stir.
found this interesting book in a bookstore, and I happened to turn it open to a page about an experiment, a study really done by an anthropologist in the 1950s. This anthropologist was performing an intelligence test for Australian Aboriginal people. The test was 5 matches on a table in front of the person he was testing. He would make a group of 3 matches, and then with some space between them, a group of 2 matches, vertically aligned, evenly spaced, except the space between the 2 different groups. The anthropologist asked the person he was testing, what could you say about this arrangement? And invariably the response would be, well, in this place, there are 3 matches, and over here, there are 2 matches. Next, the anthropologist moved one of the matches from the group of 3 and put it over with the other 2. The first group was left with only 2 matches. The anthropologist again asked the man what he saw, and the man's response was, well, I see 2 groups of 3 matches. I see 2 groups of 2 matches, and I see a 3-making match. From what I could read, the anthropologist had no clue what he was hearing. I was interested in the book because at the time I had just recently had a most interesting conversation about Australia and about the first people that lived there, often called Aboriginal people, First Peoples. I'd never thought much about Australia before that. The man I met, a member of the church I was serving at the time, his profession was as a computational linguist. So basically what a computational linguist does is he turns human languages into math. And having turned a language into something that can be calculated mathematically, it can be put on into a computer, and you can get a computer to do like what my phone does. I say, hey, Siri, and Siri starts talking to me. It tells the worst jokes. So he said to me as we were talking about all the languages and how they could compute and amazing things you can do with your phones and your computers. Dictate a letter to your computer and have it printed out. But it was fascinating. One of the things he said to me was that he still can't figure out, no one has yet figured out how to turn an Aboriginal Australian language into math. I'm sure they will someday, but they haven't done it yet. Perhaps it's because we don't quite understand exactly what they have to offer us. The more I read, the more fascinated I am. One of the first things I realized was that I looked at Australia. Australia, the bulk of the land of Australia is a very unforgiving place. From European eyes, it's this vast desert. Periods of drought last 7 or 8 years. These days, even a little longer than that. Most Australians live in a narrow band on the east coast or a narrow band on the west coast. The English-speaking folks call the rest of it the outback. And it has an image of a harsh, uninhabitable landscape. And truly, for white folks, it's pretty uninhabitable. Interesting, though, that the first people who live on those lands, the Aboriginal people, they seem to get along pretty well there. Yeah, so most of the people living in the outback are called Aboriginal, or they're called Black sometimes by white Australians. In their own languages, they call themselves humans or people. So white people came to Australia 200 years ago. But something that was really striking about the first people of Australia, their ancestors got there well over 60,000 years ago, perhaps as many as 100,000 years ago. Nowhere else on Earth do any of us have any of our cultures really have a memory that goes back that far. First peoples of Australia, they're very diverse, actually. There's not one monolithic Aboriginal culture, as Nasreen described earlier, The Time for All Ages. They have three major language groups. Before the English came, they had 240 unique languages. Some of the first peoples there still live in the same ancient ways in the outback that their ancestors first lived 60,000 or more years ago. It's interesting that these people can live as part of their landscape. That same landscape that in English is called the outback. And those of us who share those roots, we dare only to travel over that landscape quickly with lots of water and supplies because it's dangerous to us. First peoples of Australia had no practice of war when my ancestors, my own English ancestors, arrived there. I don't have any direct ancestors there, but when European people arrived there, they had no practice of war. And the way they treated the people they found there was pretty horrifying. Forgive me, a trigger warning. If you have connections to experiences like this, when white settlers came, they would make hunting parties and hunt these first peoples for fun. One of many awful stories. It was only 90 years ago that the Australian government made it illegal to kill Black Australians. Indeed, it was only 25 years ago that the government stopped taking children, Black children, from their families and putting them into homes of white people as slaves. I say this because I want to honor the people who have offered me some gifts of wisdom and have no idea who I am, but it's their stories, their art, like the art that Nasreen showed earlier. These first peoples, first inhabiting Australia 60,000 years ago, they have these song lines that Nasreen described. And they, in their song lines, they were telling stories of animals that had become extinct over 25,000 years ago. Don't know of many cultures, other cultures that could do that. In part, it's because it's a way of life that endured well in its environment, with its environment. A remarkable harmony for human beings anyway. Not perfect, far from perfect, but remarkably harmonious compared to ours. Certainly compared to 200 years of European occupation of Australia. Before white people arrived in Australia, the people that lived there would spend about 3 hours each day gathering or hunting for food. And that left them about 12 more hours to play, to talk, to relax, to sing, to perform rituals. It's interesting that in having learned this, about this kind of way that they lived, as I describe it, it would sound bizarre to an Aboriginal Australian to talk about play, conversation, relaxation, singing as somehow separate from one another like that. It's almost the way English is the essential structure of English almost forces us to separate these activities, commas between each of the words on my manuscript. It would sound bizarre to them. Senseless. Not because it's one necessarily separates the activities, doesn't separate the activities. They are distinct activities, even in the cultures of First Peoples, but severing them from the roots of their meaning to them seems bizarre. Separating anything as a sort of independent idea outside of a context for the Australian First Peoples seems almost insane. They describe it as a kind of filth because everything is connected, interconnected to them. Something that becomes disconnected becomes sick, unhealthy. And they don't mean it just figuratively, they mean it literally. I became more and more interested in the First Peoples of Australia because this profound understanding of how we are interconnected reminds me a lot of what we aspire to as Unitarian Universalists with our seventh principle. It calls us to care for this interconnected web of existence, something we're all part of. All of life is part of it. So in our European cultural heritage, there's quite a contrast to how we know and live in the world. With our European roots, we know what we know because of the way in which we discern things or pull things apart. We make decisions based on what is and is not in our minds. Let me describe a little more what I mean. So if I make a decision, if you decided to come here today, that word in English and other Western languages comes from the root to cut off, to separate, to disconnect, literally. So to make a decision for us is to disconnect or discern, an important word for a minister. In the Western tradition, when a religious leader feels called to a ministry, whether they're a Unitarian Universalist or Catholic or a Protestant, and even in other religious traditions, there's a process of discernment. The word discern actually comes from the root meaning to divide, to sever, again, to pull apart, to cut apart. A critical task historically for a religious leader in our movement is to become severed from something, to be split apart. Again, a kind of insanity to the Australian First Peoples. If you don't feel particularly connected to religion, if perhaps you have a more humanistic view of the world, when we are performing science, when we are trying philosophically to understand the world around us, we're looking at the world diacritically. It's one of the fundamental ways we understand things philosophically. We know things because we put them next to one another and we compare them, we contrast them. How are they alike? How are they different? We know something by what it is and what it is not. A square has 4 sides, a triangle has 3, a circle has 1 side and it's circular, not straight. Is not. This is what science is as well. The scientist conducts a study. She has a hypothesis. She puts it to the test. Either it holds up or it doesn't. It's diacritical. You can't falsify the hypothesis, it becomes a theory. Otherwise, it's not a good hypothesis, and you move on. Diacritical way of seeing the world. Our knowledge comes to us by the differences we're able to observe. So that matchstick experiment, most of us would have said, well, there was a group of 3 and a group of 2, then there was a group of 2 and a group of 3. The anthropologist didn't understand that the Black man in Australia that he was testing was not of lesser intelligence. He had a way of knowledge, a way of being in the world that saw each of the matchsticks embedded in a web of relationships. And indeed, the matchstick that moves becomes more relational than all the others. Requires a few more sentences to explain what happened to. The anthropologist didn't realize it, but he was discovering that his diacritical system of knowledge was a bit less sophisticated than the Aboriginal Australians' system of knowledge. So the way that most Aboriginal Australian cultures weave all of this knowledge they have, this relational knowledge together, is in their song lines, the song lines that Nasreen described in The Time for All Ages. Song lines are, yes, a map of the land where a tribe lives. And the song line is shaped by that landscape. And within that song, that map, if you will, there's information about where to find water, where to find food, where to find medicine, where it's good to sleep, places maybe you shouldn't go. These song lines are passed down from generation to generation. And the interesting thing about song lines is that they're very dense for a person who's living on the land that's a part of their heritage. But the song lines go on and on. In fact, every Australian that really knows the song line that is part of their heritage can sing a song that could take them as a map on a journey from coast to coast across the entire continent of Australia. Songlines also reveal an essential relationship to the land. It's a biological description of the land. And it's a history as well of changing ecosystems. A history so old that they contain information and stories about animals that lived and went extinct in Australia over 25,000 years ago. The songline is the very basic understanding each person in a tribe has of understanding the world, of getting some insight into that dream time that Nasreen mentioned. There's a fundamental understanding that almost all Aboriginal cultures have of something that one tribe calls the Alt Jiranga. Really a dream, but almost like a creative possibility, a creative impulse and force. Each of the tribes tells one aspect of the Alt Jiranga, the dream time, how things have evolved out of it, how things go back into it, how it sustains us, and in turn we sustain it. Songlines sing much about this part of our existence as well, and imply what may exist beyond this moment, what is larger that has yet to come into existence. Many years ago, a fellow named Bruce Chatwin wrote a book called Songlines. And it was interesting to read it. He didn't quite understand what he was encountering, which is fair because the culture of the first people of Australia is so remarkably different. I wish I've never been to Australia. I would love to go, but at least I could read what Bruce Chatwin experienced when he went many decades ago now. He was getting to know some of the fellows in the local tribe where he was living. And one of the fellows came to him and said, you know, I want to go see my father. He's not well. I'd like to see him before he passes on. And Bruce Chatwin said, yeah, well, I'd be glad to. And actually, the fellow's name was Guy. Guy said, I'd like you to go a specific way, though. So it's not going to be as easy as it would look. Bruce was glad to be getting to know the guy. He was glad he was asked. So he said, great, we'll do that. They got in the car and they started to drive. And Guy started to sing. And Bruce didn't really quite understand what was going on, but he started driving faster because, okay, we're on the way. Let's just, make some time. And the man was singing as fast as they possibly could and couldn't get his breath. And finally he said, "Can you slow down? Slow down." Apparently part of what you do when you're traveling along songline is you sing the song. So they had to drive at the speed of songline. Songlines are important because they teach a person ethics, morals. What does it mean to even exist in this universe? And the basic assumption is that everything is interconnected. We are all interdependent. One scholar explained that for a traditional Aboriginal person, it's possible to live perhaps like Guy, distant from your family, from your father. But to move to a new land off of your songline, it would literally be an experience equivalent to having part of your brain transplanted. Religious scholars propose the idea that a successful religion has mythological structures that function across generations to help us survive, to help us conserve the things that are most precious, and to help us explore different and new ways of thriving well that don't compromise our well-being. Well, Australians, Black folks have done that pretty well, better than most humans. A 40,000-year-old cave painting rediscovered by a tribe conveys just about the same meaning today that it would have 40,000 years ago. 40,000 years ago. Is any other culture able to do that? Aboriginal art continues to look pretty much the same, even though the Australian ecosystem has had a lot of changes over the last 12,000 years in the Ice Age that was a part of that. So in our Western cultural heritage, I think about how much change we have made in our environment and what has the cost been. Symbol on the national flag of Lebanon is a cedar tree. Cedar forests are long gone in Lebanon. The rich agricultural areas of the Tigris and the Euphrates, a desert, the soil laden with salts from too much irrigation. The beautiful hills of southern France, still in ecological ruin from medieval wars. Parts of the Hopi and Navajo lands damaged because of uranium mining. I mean, the story goes on and on. How are we going to live? How are we going to live? The tribal people of Australia offer wisdom to all of us. We will accept the gift. It's possible to live for tens of thousands of years in harmony with our environment. And they do it by understanding that we live in an interconnected web of existence. Graham mentioned the interest in an eighth principle among Unitarian Universalists. How could we heal ourselves? How could we begin to heal our relationships and the world around us? That's the goal of the eighth principle. The goal of the eighth principle would be for us to find a way for us to describe ourselves to others in the world. Have you ever tried to describe what Unitarian Universalism is to anybody? I know that I'll start to describe it and I'm on an airplane or I'm on a bus and they'll say, "No, can you just tell me what you believe?" So many different things. On a good day, I believe maybe in only two different things. Pretty diacritical on my own part, I guess. It's hard enough for us to understand ourselves, much less explain ourselves to the world around us. And in part, I think that may be because we aspire to a way of knowing and a way of being that is truly interconnected, that is truly about healing, and not just ourselves, but all the world around us. So I don't want to suggest in all of this that we abandon the system of knowledge we have. At the very basic level, it'd be pragmatic to keep it. This diacritical way of science, for example, is extremely powerful. We're going to have to use it whether we like it or not. It's very effective. But its capacity for destruction, I think, needs to be countered by a way of being and knowing in the world that would be carried by something like a song line, a way of seeing the world as profoundly interconnected. I think we have to learn to do this, all of us in this world. We might end up discerning ourselves into extinction otherwise. We have overarching principles, and so do the Australian tribal peoples there in Australia. And in some ways, we share some powerful similarities with them. We have congregations that are Christian or humanist, Buddhist, and we have, in any given congregation, humanists, atheists, Christians, Buddhists, Jews, Muslims, none of the above, all of the above. Yet we're all part of the same religion. We're still part of the same beloved community, and we're proud of it. We have much to learn and many gifts to receive from the Australian First Peoples. And I think the first is to understand that spirituality is not some otherworldly, alien, beautiful thing to admire from afar. It lives here, it lives now, and we are in it and are it. And it connects us. Our success in living in this world gently as well as powerfully will not ultimately be a discernment of a one true path. It will be something like a song line, a rainbow of stories and beliefs, a dream of what is possible and good, true, and always beautiful and unique in every moment, in every person, and every time.
Today we donate to the Potawatomi Cultural Heritage Center. The story of Potawatomi and the other Anishinaabe peoples stretches back to the times that precede written histories, beginning on the east coast of what is now North America. By the time Europeans arrived, a great migration was complete and tribes were living around the Great Lakes with the social structures that included communal lifestyles and seasonal lifeways. And then Europeans moved to present-day America, and a resilient group of the citizen Potawatomi refused to give up hope and have been working on this cultural center. We'll be sharing our plate with them today, and we thank you very much for all your donations. The donation link will be placed in the chat shortly. May the offering please begin.
My life goes on in endless song above earth's lamentation. I hear the real, though far off hymn that tells thy new creation. Through all storm can shake my inmost calm, while to that rock I'm clinging, since love is Lord of heaven and earth. How can I keep from when tyrants tremble in their fear and hear their dead knell ringing, when friends rejoice both far and near, how can I keep from singing? In prison cell and dungeon vile, our thoughts to them are winging, when friends by shame are undefiled, how can I keep from singing? For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child is born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. We are our grandmother's prayers, and we are our grandfather's dreamings. We are the birth of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. We are mothers of courage and fathers of time. We are daughters of dust and the sons of great visions. We're sisters of mercy and brothers of love. We are lovers of life and the builders of nations. We're seekers of truth and keepers of faith. We are makers of peace and the wisdom of ages. We are our grandmother's prayers, and we are our grandfather's dreamings. We are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are.
May we have been reminded that we are part of and participants in this beautiful universe. May we go forth from this our and this love, encouraged to strive toward faithfulness to the best in ourselves, the best in others, and in all of creation. Go in peace, be in peace. We will gather again.
Good morning, everyone. If you take a look in the chat, you will see the link to our weekly virtual connection card. And there are a lot of opportunities to, and I apologize, because of course, as soon as I've unmuted, there is a motorcycle. All right, folks, we're gonna power through it because he's parking and he'll be done soon. But we definitely need help watering the trees of the All Souls Grove, and maybe just keeping an eye on them so that we can make sure that our cicada friends are not making their way inside the netting. June is when our annual General Assembly takes place, and we're definitely coming up on that very, very quickly. So if you're interested in being a delegate to our General Assembly, please do let us know. Our socially distant meditation group is still meeting outdoors on Monday evenings, and our next Soul Matters small group is coming up. As Nasreen pointed out, it's a wonderful way to honor Charlie Baldwin to help with our adult forum. And we'll continue soliciting volunteers to serve lunch to our Freedom School scholars throughout the 5-week period of their summer session, which begins on Monday. It's a 2-hour commitment. You can do it as many or as few times as you like. So please do reach out to me if you're interested in that. And also reach out to Nasreen if you're interested in helping to pack up seeds for our community seed bank project, which so far I think is going swimmingly. Thank you so much.
A few announcements before you go. Soul Matters in person next week. I'm so excited to be with you all in person on the 20th. There's some opportunities to help families with IHN that are listed in the order of service, and Judy Lumbert is the contact person for that. So IHN, who we would usually partner with to host homeless families in our building, is housing an additional number of families who are at higher risk for COVID. And a generous donor is covering their rent, but they are asking for donations of gently used or new household goods. And there's details in the order of service about that. The congregational meeting is today. So immediately following this call, please stay on for the congregational meeting so that we can reach quorum. And all of the voting instructions will be covered during that call. Yes, I will post the order of service link in the chat. Thank you so much.
All right, everyone, I'm just going to get the recording stopped and also end our live stream.